The forest stretched endlessly, a vast and untamed world where only the strong survived. Deep within its thick canopy, a massive bear roamed, his powerful frame moving with practiced ease. His fur was scarred from battles fought, his muscles hardened by years of survival. He was no longer the helpless cub he once was, he had grown into a force of nature. Yet, despite his dominance in the wild, there was something in his eyes, a flicker of something lost, something that time had not erased. The wind rustled the trees, carrying the scent of damp earth and the distant presence of other creatures. He knew this land well, its dangers, its rhythms. Every day was a battle, for food, for territory, for survival. Yet there were moments when he stopped, staring into the vast emptiness of the world around him, as if searching for something or someone. 6 years ago, the world was different. A small, fragile cub had once wandered these same woods, alone and afraid. His tiny paws struggled to keep up with the weight of his own body. His mother had vanished, whether by the hands of hunters or by nature's cruel fate, he would never know. He had cried out, calling for warmth, for protection, for the comfort of a mother's embrace. But the forest did not answer. Weak and starving, he had collapsed near the river's edge, his breath shallow, his young body trembling from exhaustion. The world around him blurred, and as darkness crept in, he had nearly surrendered to the cold grip of fate. That was when Daniel Carter entered his life. Daniel had spent his years as a wildlife expert, dedicated to the rescue and rehabilitation of animals that could not fend for themselves. He had seen countless cases, injured birds, abandoned fawns, even orphaned wolves. But something about this cub was different. The moment Daniel found him, barely clinging to life, something inside him stirred. Scooping the frail creature into his arms, Daniel carried him away from the unforgiving wilderness, promising silently that he would give him a second chance. Days turned into weeks, and under Daniel's care, the cub began to thrive. He was given food, warmth, and most importantly, love. He learned the sound of Daniel's voice, the scent of his presence, and the gentle touch of his hands. Where once he had shivered from cold, he now nestled into the safety of Daniel's home. Their bond deepened with time. Daniel named him Bruno, a name that became a symbol of survival and strength. He fed him with patience, watched over him as he slept, and even played with him in the open fields near the forest. At first, Bruno was wary, unsure of this strange human who had taken him in. But trust grew. The once orphaned cub began to follow Daniel everywhere, his small paws padding alongside him with unshakable loyalty. They were inseparable. Bruno grew bigger, stronger, his playful nature evolved, but the connection between him and Daniel never faded. He would nuzzle against Daniel's leg, tug at his clothes, and even let out small grunts of happiness whenever Daniel returned after a long day. The world had taken everything from him, but it had also given him something priceless, a family, even if it wasn't one of blood. But the world was not kind to things that did not belong. As the months passed and Bruno grew into a young bear, whispers of concern arose. Wildlife officials insisted that keeping a bear was unnatural, that he needed to be released back into the wild, where he belonged. Daniel resisted, arguing that Bruno had never known the dangers of the forest. He was still just a cub at heart, trusting and unaware of the threats lurking beyond. But nature and law would not bend to emotion. The day would come when Daniel would be forced to make an impossible choice, one that would change both their lives forever. And when that day came, neither of them knew if they would ever see each other again. The morning was colder than usual. A heavy mist clung to the trees, wrapping the forest in a silent shroud. Bruno sensed something was wrong. For days, Daniel had been restless, speaking in hushed tones with men in uniforms. They carried clipboards, their faces lined with the certainty of bureaucracy. Words like rehabilitation and release were spoken, words Bruno could not understand, but he could feel their weight in the way Daniel's shoulders slumped. The decision had been made. Bruno had to return to the wild. Daniel had fought against it with everything he had. He pleaded with the officials, argued that the bear had never known true independence, that he had never learned to hunt, to fight, to survive alone. But regulations were clear: wild animals belonged in the wild. Keeping him would not only be dangerous but illegal. The night before the separation, Daniel sat with Bruno in their usual spot near the edge of the forest. The sky stretched endlessly above them, painted in deep hues of purple and blue. Bruno, now a growing adolescent, sat beside him, his thick fur brushing against Daniel's arm. The bear let out a soft rumbling sound, a sound of comfort, of familiarity. Daniel ran his fingers through Bruno's fur, swallowing the lump in his throat. "I wish you could understand, buddy," he whispered, his voice barely audible. Bruno didn't need words. He felt the sadness. The next morning arrived too soon. Daniel loaded Bruno into the back of a transport truck, its metal walls cold and unwelcoming. The bear let out confused grunts, shifting uneasily, his instincts warning him that something was changing. The truck rumbled to life, the vibration unfamiliar beneath his paws. The drive was long, winding deeper and deeper into the wilderness. Daniel sat in the back with him, one hand resting against his thick fur as if trying to memorize the feeling. Bruno leaned into him, sensing the unease in his human. The trust between them was unbreakable. But trust did not stop time from moving forward. When they arrived, Bruno hesitated as the doors of the transport cage opened. Before him stretched the vast forest, his new home. But it didn't feel like home. Daniel stepped out first, waiting, hoping. Bruno looked at him, confused. His instincts told him to follow. He had always followed Daniel, the man who had raised him, protected him, loved him. But now Daniel stood on the other side of an invisible line. With a heavy heart, Daniel did what he had to do. He stepped back. "Go on, buddy." Bruno didn't move. His large, dark eyes searched Daniel's face, looking for reassurance. Daniel clenched his fists, forcing his voice to remain steady. "It's okay. You're free now." Bruno took a hesitant step forward, then another. The ground beneath his paws felt unfamiliar. The wind carried scents of things he didn't recognize, territorial marks of other predators, the distant scent of prey. His ears twitched, detecting sounds his instincts should have recognized, but fear clouded his judgment. He turned back, letting out a deep, throaty rumble, a plea. Daniel's heart shattered, but he couldn't let Bruno see his pain. So he forced a smile, nodding. "Go on." And then, as if sensing there was no choice, Bruno turned and walked away. Daniel watched until the massive form of the bear disappeared into the trees, his golden-brown fur swallowed by the wilderness. The silence that followed was unbearable. The officials spoke in low voices, offering Daniel a few words of reassurance, but he barely heard them. His world had just walked away on four paws, leaving behind a hollow emptiness he couldn't explain. Bruno didn't look back. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was acceptance. Or maybe he knew that if he did, neither of them would be able to let go. And just like that, Bruno was gone. Bruno moved through the dense undergrowth, his steps slow and uncertain. The forest felt too big, too empty without Daniel's presence. Every sound, the rustling leaves, the distant howl of a wolf, the scampering of small creatures, felt foreign. He had lived here before, but it no longer felt like home. The first night alone was the hardest. The sky darkened and the air turned sharp and cold. Bruno had always slept in safety, either curled up in the shelter Daniel had made for him or near the warmth of a fire. But tonight, there was no shelter, no warmth, just the vast and unforgiving wilderness. Hunger gnawed at his stomach, but he had never hunted for himself. He had always been fed, given food by the hands of the man who had loved him. Now, there was no food, no soft voice reassuring him, only the endless silence of the wild. Bruno wandered near a stream, sniffing the air for something familiar. His instincts whispered that fish swam below, but he didn't know how to catch them. He lunged at the water clumsily, his massive paws splashing instead of striking. The fish darted away, their silver bodies vanishing into the depths. Frustration set in. For hours, he tried, but his movements were slow, uncoordinated. He was too used to being taken care of. Now, nature demanded something else of him, to fend for himself. Days passed. His hunger grew unbearable, forcing him to scavenge. He found berries, roots, and the leftovers of another predator's kill. The taste of raw meat was strange to him, but his body craved it. But hunger wasn't the only danger. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, Bruno stumbled upon another bear, a fully grown, territorial male. The air changed instantly. The older bear sniffed the wind, recognizing the scent of an intruder. His massive body stiffened, his deep-set eyes narrowing. He let out a low, rumbling growl, his message clear: this was his territory, and Bruno was not welcome. Bruno didn't understand the rules of the wild. He had never needed to fight, but nature was not forgiving. Before he could react, the older bear charged. Bruno barely had time to move before claws raked against his shoulder, sending him sprawling. Pain burned through his side, the first real injury he had ever suffered. Instinct took over. He scrambled to his feet and ran, his heart pounding as he crashed through the underbrush, his body aching, his breath ragged. He didn't stop until the scent of the older bear faded into the night. For the first time, Bruno understood what it meant to be alone. There was no Daniel to protect him, no comforting voice, no safety. This was survival. For months, he endured. The once clumsy bear grew stronger. His hunting skills improved. He learned how to fight, how to defend himself, how to carve out his own place in the wild. But even as he adapted, something inside him never faded. There were nights when he would stare at the stars, remembering a warmth he no longer had. The sound of Daniel's voice had faded from his ears, but not from his heart. Deep down, in a part of himself he didn't fully understand, Bruno had never truly forgotten. The cabin felt empty. For years, the walls had echoed with the soft shuffling of paws, the low rumbles of a growing bear who had once filled the space with life. Now there was only silence. Daniel sat on the worn wooden porch, staring into the vast wilderness beyond. The trees swayed gently, the wind whispering through the leaves. It was the same forest where he had found Bruno, where he had raised him, where he had lost him. It had been months since the release, but the ache had not faded. He tried to move on. He threw himself into work, assisting wildlife programs, training new rescuers, but nothing felt the same. Every orphaned animal he came across reminded him of the cub he had once saved. Every big print in the mud made his chest tighten. Had Bruno survived? That question haunted him. He had done everything he could to prepare Bruno, but in his heart he knew the truth. Bruno had been raised differently. He hadn't learned the harshness of nature the way a wild bear should. Had he struggled? Had he found food? Had he been hurt? Daniel spent sleepless nights staring at the ceiling, imagining all the things that could have gone wrong. He told himself that he had done the right thing, that Bruno had been given the chance to live as he was meant to. But if that was true, why did it feel like a mistake? Every so often, Daniel returned to the place where he had released Bruno. He knew it was pointless. Bruno was a bear, a wild creature now. But still, he came back, walking along the same riverbank, scanning the trees for any sign of the companion he had lost. The forest remained silent. Days turned to weeks, then months, then years. Daniel aged, but the loss never dulled. Bruno was gone. Or so he thought, until one fateful day, everything changed. The forest looked the same, yet something felt different. Daniel hadn't planned on coming back. It had been 6 years since he released Bruno, 6 years since he had stood in this exact spot, watching the bear disappear into the trees. He had told himself that there was no point in hoping, no reason to believe that Bruno would still be here, or that he would even remember. But something pulled him back. It was a chill autumn morning, the air laced with the scent of damp earth and pine. Daniel adjusted the straps of his old backpack, stepping carefully over the uneven forest floor. He moved slowly, cautiously, listening to the familiar sounds of birds chirping and leaves crunching under his boots. He wasn't sure what he was looking for. He had come to terms with Bruno's absence long ago. Maybe he just wanted to feel close to him again, to stand in the place where their story had ended. But fate had other plans. Daniel walked deeper into the woods, passing the river where Bruno had once clumsily splashed as a cub. A bittersweet smile tugged at the corners of his lips. So much time had passed, yet the memories remained clear. Then something shifted in the air, a rustling sound, a branch snapping. Daniel froze. It wasn't a small animal, the sound was too heavy, too deliberate. His breath caught in his throat as he slowly turned his head. His heart pounded in his chest, his pulse thundering in his ears. There, standing between the trees, was a massive bear. Its golden-brown fur gleamed in the soft morning light. Its frame was powerful, built by years of surviving in the wild. Its dark eyes locked onto him, unblinking, intense. Daniel's body stiffened. The bear was watching him. A part of him knew that turning his back could be a mistake. He had spent years working with wild animals. He understood their instincts, their unpredictability, and this bear was no exception. Still, something about the way it stood there, unmoving, silent, made a chill run down his spine. Daniel swallowed hard, forcing himself to remain still. His mind raced through every possible outcome. Had he wandered into a bear's territory? Was he seen as a threat? Or, a thought crossed his mind, an impossible thought. But before he could process it, the bear took a step closer. Then another. The gap between them narrowed. Daniel's breath hitched. His muscles tensed. Every instinct told him to prepare for the worst. And then the bear did something that left him completely frozen. The bear took another step forward, its massive paws pressing silently into the damp earth. Every muscle in Daniel's body tightened, his instincts screaming at him to stay still. He had encountered wild bears before, had studied their behavior, had even rescued a few. But this moment felt different. The tension in the air was thick, the silence almost deafening. The bear's dark eyes never wavered. They held something unspoken, something Daniel couldn't quite understand. There was no immediate aggression, no signs of a predator preparing to attack. The animal seemed hesitant, as if battling an internal conflict. Daniel's breath was slow, controlled. He knew that a single wrong move could provoke a defensive reaction. His hands stayed at his sides, fingers twitching slightly from the rush of adrenaline flooding his system. The bear, now only a few feet away, let out a low rumble, not quite a growl, but not a sound of warning either. Something about that sound struck a chord deep within him. Then the bear lifted its head slightly, sniffing the air. Its nostrils flared, and for the first time, recognition flickered in its gaze. It wasn't just observing him anymore, it was studying him, searching for something beyond the surface. Daniel's heart pounded. The thought that had seemed impossible minutes ago now clawed its way into his mind with undeniable force. Could it really be? His eyes traced the bear's features, the golden-brown fur, the deep-set eyes, the sheer size of it. It had been 6 years, and time had changed everything. But there were certain things that time could not erase. A scar, faint but visible, ran along the bear's left shoulder. A mark that Daniel knew all too well. His chest tightened. That scar had been there before. He remembered cleaning the wound, running his hands through thick fur, reassuring the frightened cub that everything would be okay. He remembered. And now, staring at the fully grown bear standing before him, he realized something chilling. Bruno remembered too. The forest stood still as if holding its breath. Bruno's massive form loomed before Daniel, his muscles taut, his breathing slow but deliberate. His eyes locked onto the man who had once been his entire world. But something in those dark depths flickered with uncertainty, as if two halves of himself were battling. The wild animal he had become and the cub who had once trusted this man with his life. Daniel's pulse thrummed in his ears. He knew that in the wild, a bear's instincts ruled everything. 6 years had passed. Bruno had survived, had fought, had become something stronger, something dangerous. Had the bear he raised been buried under those years of struggle? Had instinct erased the bond they once shared? A bear, no matter how familiar it had once been, was still a bear, and a fully grown one at that. Daniel had seen how unpredictable they could be, how quickly an animal's primal nature could take over. Even a single misstep, a sudden movement, could turn this moment into something deadly. Bruno took another slow step forward, his immense weight barely making a sound. His nostrils flared, drawing in Daniel's scent, and for a moment his posture stiffened, as if recognizing something long buried but not forgotten. The hesitation was there, flickering in the way his ears twitched, in the way his breathing changed. Daniel remained perfectly still, his body tense but his expression calm. He wasn't sure if he was staring at his old friend or a wild predator sizing up its next move. The memories of their years together flashed through his mind, the playful cub nuzzling against his leg, the small paws that had once reached out for comfort, the trust that had taken months to build. But those memories belonged to a past that might no longer exist. The wind shifted slightly, carrying Daniel's scent through the air. Bruno's ears flicked, his massive head tilting slightly. There was something there, deep inside the bear, a moment of recognition battling against pure survival instinct. Then Bruno let out a sound, low, deep, almost uncertain. It wasn't a growl of aggression. It wasn't a warning. It was something else, something Daniel had heard before. His chest tightened. It was the same soft rumble Bruno used to make as a cub when he felt safe, a sound of comfort, of familiarity. A sound Daniel had feared he would never hear again. The battle inside Bruno wasn't over yet. But for the first time in 6 years, Daniel saw something in those deep brown eyes that gave him hope. Bruno was still in there. And now, the question was, would the bear remember enough to trust him again? Daniel barely breathed. The moment stretched endlessly, heavy with uncertainty. Bruno remained still, his massive body tense, as if caught between two forces pulling him in opposite directions. The instincts of a wild beast and the echoes of a bond that time had not erased. Then something happened that Daniel never expected. Bruno took another step forward. But this time, his posture had changed. His head lowered slightly, his ears twitched, and his eyes, once sharp with hesitation, softened. There was something deeply familiar in that movement, something Daniel had seen 1,000 times before. Bruno was testing him. Daniel swallowed hard, resisting the overwhelming urge to reach out. He knew that one wrong move could break whatever fragile thread was holding this moment together. Instead, he did the only thing that made sense: he waited. The massive bear moved closer, his snout now just inches away. The wind carried Daniel's scent toward him, and Bruno inhaled deeply, his breath warm against Daniel's skin. The recognition deepened. Something inside the bear stirred, not instinct, not fear, but something far more powerful. Then, in a move that defied every expectation, Bruno did something unthinkable. Instead of growling, instead of turning away, instead of attacking, he nudged Daniel's hand with his nose. Daniel's breath hitched. It was impossible. For 6 years, Bruno had lived in the wild. He had fought, hunted, survived. The world had shaped him into something untamed. And yet here he was, doing the same gentle gesture he had done as a cub, the same motion he had used when he wanted comfort, when he wanted to feel safe. Daniel's throat tightened. He could hardly believe what was happening. His fingers trembled as he slowly, so painfully slowly, lifted his hand. Every instinct told him this was a risk, that even the smallest mistake could turn this into a deadly encounter. But Bruno did not flinch. And then, as Daniel's fingers brushed against the thick fur of Bruno's muzzle, the bear closed his eyes. A deep, familiar rumbling sound vibrated through his chest. Daniel knew that sound. Bruno was purring, the same sound he had made as a cub whenever Daniel scratched behind his ears. The same sound he had made when curling up next to him in the early days of his rescue. Daniel felt his vision blur. 6 years. 6 years apart. 6 years in the wild. 6 years of separation. And yet Bruno remembered. Against all odds, despite everything, Bruno had not forgotten him. And in that moment, Daniel realized something that made his chest ache, neither had he. The weight of 6 years melted away in an instant. Daniel's fingers trembled as they sank into Bruno's thick fur, the familiar warmth grounding him in a moment that felt almost unreal. The massive bear, once an orphaned cub who had depended on him for survival, now stood before him not as a wild beast ready to attack, but as something far greater, a friend who had never forgotten. Bruno's deep purring sound rumbled through the air, a vibration that traveled straight to Daniel's core. He had heard it countless times before. But to hear it now, after so much time, after so much distance, it was almost too much to take in. His chest tightened. His throat burned. But he refused to let the emotions overwhelm him. Slowly, cautiously, Daniel moved his hand across Bruno's fur, half expecting the moment to shatter. But it didn't. The bear's body relaxed, his breathing deep and steady. He leaned ever so slightly into the touch, a silent confirmation that he recognized this presence, this bond, this man. Daniel exhaled a shaky breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Bruno remembered. The scars along the bear's body told the story of his years in the wild, the battles he had fought, the struggles he had endured, the life he had built without Daniel. And yet, despite everything, there was still something inside him that had held on, something that had refused to let go. Daniel knew he should step back. That this was dangerous. That he was standing before a creature whose instincts should have taken over by now. But they hadn't. Instead, Bruno remained still, allowing Daniel's presence as if no time had passed at all. Then something even more unexpected happened. Bruno lifted his massive head and pressed it against Daniel's chest. A shuddering breath left Daniel's lips as he instinctively placed both hands on the bear's broad shoulders. It was a gesture so familiar, so deeply ingrained in their past, that for a moment, it felt as though 6 years had never passed. Daniel had spent so many nights wondering if Bruno had survived, if he had thrived, if he had ever thought about the man who had once been his entire world. Now he had his answer. Bruno had never forgotten. The bear let out a soft huff, his body still and calm. The powerful creature who had spent years surviving in the wild, who had fought for his place in nature, had chosen not to see Daniel as a threat. Instead, he had chosen to see him as family. Daniel swallowed hard, his throat thick with emotion. He had told himself that this moment could never happen, that it was impossible, that the past had been left behind. But Bruno had proven him wrong. For what felt like hours, they simply stood there, man and bear, two souls reunited against all odds. But deep down, Daniel knew the truth. No matter how strong their bond was, no matter how much Bruno remembered, they still lived in two separate worlds now. And soon, Daniel would have to make the hardest choice of all. Daniel wished he could freeze this moment, hold on to it forever, but some things were never meant to last. Bruno remained still, his massive head pressed against Daniel's chest. The bear's deep breathing matched his, slow and steady, as if both of them knew that this was temporary. Daniel ran his fingers through the thick fur one last time, memorizing the feel of it, the warmth, the silent trust between them. It felt surreal standing here in the same forest where they had parted 6 years ago, in the same spot where Daniel had watched Bruno walk away into the unknown. Back then, he had felt like he had lost a part of himself. Now, standing face to face once again, he felt that same ache creeping in. But as much as his heart longed to hold on, he knew the truth: Bruno did not belong to him anymore. This wasn't the same orphaned cub that Daniel had once carried in his arms, feeding him with gentle hands, staying up late at night to make sure he was warm enough. The bear standing before him had survived years in the wild, had learned to hunt, to fight, to thrive. He was no longer the helpless creature Daniel had once protected. He was something else entirely. He was free. And no matter how much Daniel wanted to believe otherwise, he had to let him go. He swallowed hard, taking a slow step back. Bruno's ears flicked slightly at the movement, his dark eyes still locked onto Daniel's face. For a moment, it almost felt like the bear was studying him, reading his expression, sensing the emotions running through him. Daniel wanted to say something, but what could he possibly say? Words wouldn't change anything. They wouldn't bring back time or undo the 6 years that had separated them. Instead, he did what he always did, he let his actions speak for him. He raised his hand slightly, palm open, the same way he had when Bruno was just a cub. Back then, it had been a sign of comfort, a reassurance that everything was okay. It had always been a simple gesture, one that Bruno had come to recognize as safe. Bruno blinked, his massive frame unmoving. Then something incredible happened. The bear lifted his snout ever so slightly and exhaled a slow, deep breath. A soft huff, filled not with aggression, not with warning, but with understanding. Daniel's chest tightened. He understood. Bruno knew. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a trick of fate. Bruno remembered everything. And yet, despite that, he did not take a step forward. He did not beg for food. He did not seek comfort like he once had. Instead, he simply stood there, waiting, as if silently acknowledging what Daniel had known all along: their worlds had changed. Daniel felt his fingers twitch at his side, his breath shaky. He could stay here forever, let the moment stretch into eternity, but deep down he knew that wasn't fair to either of them. Bruno had moved on, had built a life, had become what he was always meant to be. Keeping him here, clinging to the past, would only be selfish. So Daniel did the hardest thing he had ever done. He stepped away. Bruno's ears twitched again, his gaze following Daniel's movement. For the first time, he took a single step backward, mirroring him. Daniel nodded, even though his heart ached. "You're home now, buddy," he whispered, barely recognizing his own voice. Bruno did not move. His deep, intelligent eyes lingered on Daniel for a long, heavy moment, filled with something that words could never capture. Then the massive bear exhaled again, slower this time, as if releasing something he had held inside. With deliberate movement, he turned his great body, muscles rolling beneath his thick fur. His paws pressed into the damp earth as he took slow, measured steps back toward the forest. Daniel felt his breath hitch as he watched Bruno walk away. It felt just like before, the same unbearable finality, the same gut-wrenching feeling of loss. But this time, something was different. Bruno was not afraid. He did not hesitate. He knew where he belonged. Daniel watched him disappear between the trees, the golden-brown fur blending into the earthy tones of the wilderness. The sounds of the forest swallowed him whole, the branches swaying as if to close the chapter they had unknowingly reopened. But just before Bruno vanished completely, he stopped. For a heartbeat, Daniel thought he was imagining it. Bruno turned his massive head slightly, looking over his shoulder, one last glance, one final acknowledgement. Daniel's throat burned. It was the bear's way of saying goodbye. Then, without hesitation, Bruno disappeared into the trees for the last time. Daniel stood there, staring at the empty space where his friend had been, the emotions pressing against his chest like a weight too heavy to carry. But despite the ache, despite the rawness of it all, he smiled. Because this time, it wasn't a goodbye filled with sorrow, it was a farewell filled with peace. Bruno had found his place in the world. He was where he was always meant to be. And though they walked separate paths now, though the world had changed, one truth remained unchanged: some bonds could never be broken. Not by time. Not by distance. Not even by nature itself. Daniel inhaled deeply, the crisp forest air filling his lungs. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, knowing without a shadow of a doubt that wherever Bruno was, he would remember him too. Always. If you enjoyed this heartwarming story of an unbreakable bond, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel for more incredible wildlife stories. Your support helps us bring more emotional and inspiring content to life. Turn on notifications so you never miss an amazing tale of nature, survival, and unexpected friendships.